September 7th, 1945, 2:30 in the afternoon. The South Dakota prairie stretches endlessly under a sky so vast it makes human concerns seem small, but Lieutenant Takeshi Sato's world has just contracted to the shocking sight of what appears to be the highest-ranking American military officer he has ever encountered, walking casually through the prisoner of war camp where he has spent the last 4 months wondering if he will ever see Japan again. The man approaching the camp perimeter wears regalia that Sato's military training tells him must indicate supreme command authority. Eagle feathers arranged in an elaborate headdress, beadwork that displays geometric patterns suggesting strategic planning capabilities, leather garments decorated with symbols that could only represent battlefield victories, and military honors accumulated over decades of service. Sato has been trained to recognize rank insignia from every major military power, and while he doesn't recognize the specific symbols this officer displays, the elaborateness of his regalia clearly indicates someone of extraordinary importance in the American military hierarchy, perhaps a general, possibly even higher, someone whose presence at this remote POW facility suggests that major policy decisions are being made about the fate of Japanese prisoners now that the war has officially ended. Sato straightens to attention and prepares to offer the formal bow that Japanese military protocol demands when encountering superior officers, even enemy officers whose authority must be acknowledged according to the code of Bushido that governs honorable behavior between warriors. He has been taught that respect for military rank transcends nationality, that a true soldier recognizes courage and leadership regardless of which flag they serve. But the man Sato is preparing to honor with ceremonial respect is not an American general at all. He is Joseph Standing Bear, a 73-year-old Lakota elder who has walked 3 miles from the Pine Ridge Reservation to visit his grandson, Corporal Robert Standing Bear, who works as a guard at the POW camp, and who has invited his grandfather to see the facility where he serves. Joseph wears traditional Lakota regalia, not because it represents military rank in any system that Sato would recognize, but because it represents spiritual authority, cultural knowledge, and community respect earned through decades of preserving Lakota traditions in the face of government policies designed to eliminate indigenous cultures. The eagle feathers in his headdress represent prayers offered and answered, ceremonies conducted, young people guided through the transitions that mark a life lived in harmony with traditional values. The geometric patterns on Joseph's beadwork tell stories about Lakota cosmology, relationships between human beings and the natural world, spiritual principles that have guided his people for generations that stretch back beyond written history. The leather garments he wears were crafted according to techniques passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, from father to son, through family lines that have maintained cultural continuity despite centuries of pressure to abandon traditional ways. Sato sees military insignia, where Joseph carries spiritual symbols, battlefield honors, where Joseph displays ceremonial regalia, command authority, where Joseph embodies cultural preservation. The misidentification reflects not just individual confusion, but the collision between 2 entirely different systems for understanding how human societies organize respect, authority, and recognition of exceptional achievement. As Joseph approaches the camp entrance, Sato steps forward and executes a formal bow that stops conversations among prisoners and guards alike. The 90-degree bow, held for precisely 5 seconds, represents the highest form of respect that Japanese military tradition reserves for encounters with supreme command authority. Sato's gesture acknowledges what he believes is the presence of an American general whose rank demands recognition even from enemy prisoners. Joseph pauses, surprised by the unexpected courtesy, from a Japanese prisoner whose intentions he cannot immediately understand. In Lakota culture, respectful acknowledgement between strangers is common, but the specific formality of Sato's bow suggests something more significant than casual politeness. Joseph responds with a slight nod that acknowledges the gesture while indicating his uncertainty about its meaning. The American guards watch the exchange with confusion that mirrors Joseph's uncertainty. They recognize Sato as one of the more disciplined prisoners, a former Imperial Navy officer who maintains military bearing despite his circumstances. But they don't understand why he would offer such elaborate respect to Joseph Standing Bear, whom they know as the grandfather of one of their colleagues, rather than as any kind of military authority. In war, rank commands respect. Military hierarchies exist to establish clear chains of command, to ensure that orders flow efficiently from strategic decision-makers to tactical implementers, to create systems of authority that can function effectively under the stress and chaos of combat operations. Recognition of rank, even enemy rank, represents acknowledgement of military professionalism that transcends national differences. But sometimes, misreading rank reveals deeper honor. Sometimes, the mistake that makes ceremonial regalia look like military insignia illuminates connections between different systems of respect and recognition. Sometimes, cultural confusion creates opportunities for understanding that wouldn't exist without the initial misinterpretation of symbols that carry authority in traditions the observer doesn't recognize. The prisoner of war camp near Rapid City had been operating since 1943, housing German and Italian prisoners before receiving Japanese POWs during the final months of the Pacific War. The camp's location in South Dakota placed it on land that had been traditional Lakota territory before becoming part of the reservation system that confined Native American tribes to designated areas where they could be monitored and controlled by federal authorities. The proximity of the POW camp to Pine Ridge Reservation created unusual opportunities for interaction between Japanese prisoners and Lakota people. Two groups that had rarely encountered each other, but which shared experiences of military tradition, cultural suppression, and complex relationships with the American government that had defeated their armed resistance and confined them to restricted territories. Sato's military background included service aboard Japanese destroyers in the Pacific Theater, where he had learned to respect warrior traditions and military professionalism regardless of nationality. His capture following the Battle of Leyte Gulf had introduced him to American POW procedures that generally adhered to international law, but which also reflected American attitudes about Japanese military culture and the honor codes that governed prisoner behavior. Joseph Standing Bear's presence at the POW camp represented his role as cultural elder rather than military authority, but his regalia carried symbols of warrior tradition that resonated across cultural boundaries. Lakota military societies had historically recognized courage, leadership, and service to community through ceremonial regalia that indicated spiritual authority as much as martial accomplishment. The eagle feathers that Sato interpreted as supreme military insignia represented Joseph's role as keeper of sacred knowledge, his responsibility for conducting ceremonies, his recognition within Lakota community as someone who had earned the right to wear symbols of spiritual authority. Each feather had been earned through service to his people, through prayers offered in difficult times, through guidance provided to young people learning to navigate between traditional values and modern pressures. Do you think Sato's misidentification of Joseph's regalia as military insignia reflected his trained ability to recognize authority? Or do you think it revealed something universal about how warrior cultures express respect for courage and leadership? Do you think cultural symbols always carry the meaning their creators intended? Or do they acquire new meanings when encountered by people from different military traditions? The misunderstanding about Joseph's status came to light when Corporal Robert Standing Bear arrived to greet his grandfather and found Japanese prisoners gathered around the elder in respectful attention that puzzled both American guards and Lakota visitor. Robert understood immediately that cultural confusion had created a situation where his grandfather's ceremonial regalia was being interpreted as American military rank insignia. Robert served as interpreter for the conversation that followed, translating between his grandfather's limited English, Sato's basic conversational English, and the cultural concepts that neither man fully understood about the other's background. The explanation of Lakota elder status and Japanese military protocol revealed the misidentification that had caused the formal bow and the gathering of respectful prisoners. But the explanation also revealed deeper connections between Lakota and Japanese warrior traditions that transcended the specific misunderstanding about ceremonial regalia. Both cultures emphasized respect for elders, recognition of service to community, and the importance of maintaining honor codes that governed behavior between warriors, regardless of their specific conflicts or competitions. Sato learned that Joseph's regalia represented spiritual authority rather than military command, but he also learned that Lakota tradition recognized forms of leadership and service that paralleled Japanese concepts of honor, duty, and community responsibility. The eagle feathers that he had interpreted as military insignia carried meanings about courage, sacrifice, and dedication to principles larger than individual self-interest. Joseph learned that Sato's formal bow represented Japanese military training rather than personal submission, but he also learned that Japanese warrior culture included concepts of respect for authority and recognition of honor that paralleled Lakota values about acknowledging leadership and service to community welfare. The conversation between Joseph and Sato, mediated by Robert's translation, evolved into an exchange of stories about military service, cultural preservation, and the challenges of maintaining traditional values when confronted by forces that demanded cultural assimilation or military surrender. Joseph talked about Lakota warriors who had fought to protect tribal lands and traditional ways of life. Sato described Japanese naval service and the honor codes that had governed his military career. Both men discovered that their seemingly different military experiences reflected similar commitments to defending community values against external threats, similar willingness to sacrifice individual safety for collective welfare, similar recognition that true strength came from spiritual preparation as much as physical training. The friendship that developed between Joseph and Sato became part of a larger pattern of connection between Japanese prisoners and Lakota people employed at or visiting the POW camp. Japanese appreciation for ceremonial discipline and respect for elders resonated with Lakota values. Lakota recognition of warrior honor and spiritual authority connected with Japanese military traditions that emphasized service to principles larger than individual survival. The cultural exchange that began with Sato's misinterpretation of Joseph's regalia created ongoing conversations about military tradition, spiritual authority, and the relationship between individual honor and community welfare that enriched both men's understanding of warrior culture beyond their specific national or tribal contexts. Joseph began visiting the camp regularly, not as military authority, but as cultural elder, whose presence provided Japanese prisoners with examples of how traditional values could be maintained, despite government pressure for cultural abandonment. His regalia continued to command respect, but now the respect reflected understanding rather than misidentification. Sato organized formal tea ceremonies for Joseph's visits, adapting Japanese ritual practices to prison camp conditions while honoring Lakota elder status through cultural expressions that transcended language barriers. The ceremonies became opportunities for cultural exchange, that allowed Japanese prisoners to demonstrate respect while providing Joseph with insights into warrior traditions from across the Pacific. The other Japanese prisoners initially approached Joseph with the same formal respect that Sato had demonstrated, but gradually developed individual relationships with the Lakota elder that reflected their own backgrounds and interests. Some were drawn to Joseph's stories about Lakota military societies. Others appreciated his knowledge of traditional crafts and spiritual practices. Joseph's grandson Robert facilitated these interactions, serving as cultural interpreter and helping both sides navigate the differences between Lakota and Japanese approaches to respect, ceremony, and cross-cultural communication. Robert's military service had given him understanding of Japanese discipline and hierarchy, while his Lakota upbringing had taught him the importance of elder authority and traditional knowledge. The broader implications of the cultural exchange between Joseph and the Japanese prisoners extended beyond individual friendships to illuminate connections between different forms of warrior culture and spiritual authority. Both Lakota and Japanese traditions emphasize the relationship between military service and spiritual preparation. Both recognized forms of honor that transcended battlefield success or failure. Both cultures had experienced government policies designed to eliminate traditional practices and force assimilation into mainstream American society. Lakota people had endured boarding school education that forbade native languages and traditional ceremonies. Japanese Americans had faced internment and loyalty questionnaires that demanded renunciation of cultural heritage as proof of patriotism. The recognition of these parallels created solidarity between Japanese prisoners and Lakota people that transcended their different relationships with the American government. Japanese POWs who had been defeated in military service connected with Lakota people who had been conquered in cultural warfare, finding common ground in shared experience of maintaining honor despite defeat or displacement. After the war ended and the prisoners were repatriated to Japan, several maintained correspondence with Joseph Standing Bear through letters that Robert translated and delivered. The friendships that had developed in the POW camp continued through decades of mutual respect and cultural exchange that enriched both Japanese and Lakota communities. Sato returned to Japan carrying stories about Lakota warrior tradition that he shared with veterans organizations and cultural groups interested in comparative military history. His experience with Joseph Standing Bear had taught him that warrior honor existed in many forms across different cultures, and that respect for courage and service could transcend national boundaries and historical conflicts. Joseph continued wearing his traditional regalia to community ceremonies and cultural events, but he also began incorporating stories about Japanese warrior culture into his teaching about cross-cultural understanding and the universal values that connect different military traditions. The regalia that had been mistaken for American military insignia became part of discussions about how symbols carry different meanings for different people, while representing similar values across cultural boundaries. The POW camp, where the cultural exchange had taken place, was eventually closed and converted to other uses, but the friendships and understanding that had developed there continued to influence both Lakota and Japanese communities. The misunderstanding that had made ceremonial regalia look like military rank had created lasting connections between warrior cultures separated by geography, but united by shared values. The museum that eventually documented the POW camp's history included exhibits about the cross-cultural relationships that had developed between prisoners and local Native American communities, emphasizing the role of cultural misunderstanding in creating opportunities for mutual respect and learning. Joseph's regalia was displayed alongside Japanese military items as examples of how different cultures express warrior values and community authority. In the end, the story of Sato's misinterpretation of Joseph's regalia became a reminder that respect transcends cultural boundaries when it reflects genuine recognition of honor, courage, and service to principles larger than individual self-interest. The ceremonial regalia that had been mistaken for military insignia had served its true purpose, commanding respect for wisdom, spiritual authority, and dedication to community welfare that any warrior culture could recognize and honor. If stories like this make you think about the symbols of authority we encounter and sometimes misinterpret, about the respect that connects warrior cultures across national and tribal boundaries, about the regalia we all wear, and the honor it represents when correctly understood, then perhaps you understand why some misunderstandings create deeper understanding, why some cultural confusion leads to cultural connection, and why the most important insignia are sometimes the ones that represent spiritual authority rather than military rank.